talk? There we go. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first Scrutiny Board for Communities and Equalities. Previous viewers and attendees might recall that previously we had a Scrutiny Board for Communities, Environment and Housing. Due to the review of the scrutiny functions now, we have more scrutiny boards, and it means that this scrutiny board is now focusing more intently on communities, equalities and locality working. And we have a fresh membership for that scrutiny board going forward, and we are now going to introduce those members, and I'll start with Councillor Hannan.
Good morning, everybody. Councillor Abdul Hannan for Headingley High Park Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Kevin Ritchie, Bramley and Stanley Ward.
Hello, everyone. Lisa Martin from Councillor for Roundhay Ward.
Good morning, Laura Jane Fisher, Councillor for Moortown.
Good morning, Councillor Del Rey from Bramley and Stanley Ward.
Good morning, I'm David Fryer, Head of Welfare and Benefits.
Morning everyone, I'm Alicia Barker, I'm the Head of Customer Contact for Telephone and Digital.
Good morning everybody, I'm Nick Hart, I'm Head of Customer Contact for Face-to-Face Services.
Morning everyone, I'm Ian Strickland from Business Development.
Morning, I'm Emma Flint, Councillor in Wheatwood and Exec Member for Equality, Health and Adults.
Good morning, Claire Smith, Head of Safer Neighbourhoods and Antisocial Behaviour, Safe Stronger Communities.
Morning, everybody. Paul Money, Chief Officer for Safer Stronger Communities.
Good morning, everyone. Temi Tapiadamosu, Director of Communities, Environment, Housing and Health.
Good morning everyone, Councillor Asghar Khan, Councillor for Bournemouth and Richmond Hill Ward and the Exec Member for Housing and Hubs.
Good morning everybody, nice to see old and new faces. I'm Councillor Mary Harland, representing Kibbutz and Methley Ward, and I am the Exec Board Member, back as the Exec Board Member for Communities and Community Safety.
Morning all, Councillor Neil Ash-Chowhan, Headingley High Park Ward.
Good morning everyone, Councillor Wednesday Robbins, Family and Wortley Ward.
Good morning everybody, Councillor Norma Harrington, Wetherby Ward.
And I'm Stuart Galton, and I'm Councillor for Rothwell Ward, and I am chairing the meeting. And I've just noted that I have failed in my first task, which was to differentiate between the members of the board and those who are attending the board. But everybody is welcome today. And in particular, I will note that we have in attendance, and it's nice to have an audience, law students from the University of Leeds, Jesslyn, Shiza Malik and Taslima Abeda. And you're very welcome today and showing interest in how we make decision making accountable on Leeds City Council. So, can I first remind people that of course we are being webcast and you will see your faces on the screen live as it is going out. We don't have a huge audience, it has to be said, but of course this is more importantly a great record for anybody who is interested in how decisions are made or reviewed to go back and review. One of the things I will point out to people who are attending today is that you can pull your microphone forward, which might help with any RSI issues in the future, but please do not speak directly into the microphone because that can end up causing a different RSI issue for those listening. And please ensure that you, and people have done so far, so that's great, switch on the mic to speak and switch off so others have the opportunity to in response. Right, thank you, that's the business element sorted out. We will now go on to the formal aspect of the agenda. So, item 1, appeals against refusal of inspection of documents.
There are no appeals today, Chair.
Item 2, items for exclusion.
No exclusions today, Chair.
Item 3, any late items of business.
No late items, Chair.
Item 4, declarations of interest. Do any members of the board have any declarations to interest that they haven't declared already? Thank you very much. Apologies.
We've no apologies from members of the board today. Lee Hemsworth has just asked if we could note his apologies and note that his service heads are here in place of him today.
Great, thank you. Right, so we'll move into discussing the minutes. And the minutes, of course, are from the Scrutiny Board for Economy, Housing and Communities. Oh yes, Environment, Housing, Communities. So, in terms of, proposing and seconding, we will need to rely on those members who were in that previous board. So, Councillor Hannan, are you proposing that we accept the minutes? And Councillor Harrington will second. That's great. Are there any matters arising from those minutes? I have none to point out to you as chair, other than what's in the next item on the agenda. So we'll move on to item 7, which is the terms of reference. As explained at the beginning of the meeting, the terms of reference of the Scrutiny Board have changed because we have a more focused remit. And I don't think there's anything that we have to do particularly other than to note the content of the terms of reference. Are we all happy with the terms of reference, members of the board? Thank you very much. Now we'll go on to item 8, which is about co-opted members. This gives the opportunity for the board to suggest if we would like to have permanent co-opted members as part of our membership for this year. Does anybody wish to add any co-opted members to the board this year? No? Okay, thank you very much. I note that we can review this going forward if we find that there is a need, and we may review it in 6 months' time. Thanks very much. We'll now move on to the first substantial item of the agenda, which is performance monitoring. At this point, I think it's worth noting for those who are watching the webcast, and of course for those present, that scrutiny boards are not the principal decision-making body on Leeds City Council. That function is held by the Executive Board. However, in terms of delivering good policy, decisions need to be reviewed and scrutinised to make sure that they're delivering what has been intended by those decision makers. And that's why we have the second round of review at scrutiny level. And a key helper in helping us keep up to date with whether or not the policy that the council has introduced is working and delivering at the rate that we expect is to review the data which is available to show us that things are improving or not in the way that we intended. And that is what this report is about. It is noted that the key performance indicators, though, oftentimes might allude to an area that we have concern over and don't measure directly the area of concern that we might have. And sometimes they can be indicative. And that will be reflected in the conversation going forward. So, just to let you know, in terms of going through the report, we will be going through the key performance indicators one at a time, and as each section arrives, we will introduce the service lead for that area so that they can offer a very brief overview of the results that they're talking about. Because the major introduction in terms of the overview will be provided by Dr. Temitope Adamasu, who is our new Director of Communities, and I will hand over to her now to introduce the item.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I will be brief because the report really outlines a lot of what we've been doing. As a directorate, we're really keen to use the data. You mentioned the KPIs, of which we've got many KPIs. One of the things that we've learned from Scrutiny Board, particularly this board that you've chaired, is really the what's the impact that it's having on residents, what's the impact that it's having on communities. So we've really worked hard with Ian and the team to look at key themes that our data can align themselves around, and that's what we've got in the report, that we're really looking at what residents are experiencing, how are the needs changing, and how do the interventions that we have, how are we addressing the demand pressures that are emerging as well. We also want to really look at our services to look at how we're actually supporting residents and communities going forward. And then in the time that we're in, that financial sustainability, really looking at value for money is absolutely key. And then also looking at our neighbourhood approach. We talk a lot about place-based interventions and the way that we want to work. We really want to ensure that we are improving neighbourhoods and that we're really contributing to having stronger, more resilient communities as well. So what you have within this performance report is the KPIs that we have, that we put them into these key baskets, but we've got the different services here to talk to you more about the KPIs that you see, but importantly what the impact is having on residents and communities going forward as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ian Strickland has coordinated the delivery of the report. Do you have anything else to add?
No, thank you, Chair. Nothing further for me to add.
Thank you very much. So we'll move on to our first set of KPIs, and those are covered by Paul Money, who is the Chief Officer for Safer Stronger Communities. Paul, do you wish to introduce the KPIs with a couple of headlines?
Yeah, if that's okay, Chair, I'll just set a bit of context. I think colleagues will be familiar with this area of business, either through previous work on scrutiny boards like this, or indeed the kind of ward issues that you may be seeing. We're reporting on 4 areas. If I can start with the support for rough sleepers. I think the first thing I'd like to say, Chair, if it's okay with you in terms of that, is just reflect on a conversation we had outside of this meeting. Whilst it may seem like I'm talking a lot about community safety related issues, and indeed we will do, our approach to tackling rough sleepers is more about thinking about a vulnerable population group and how we might best respond given some of the poor outcomes that people in that cohort often find themselves subject to. That's not to say there aren't community safety issues associated with that area of work, but I'm reporting on it today because I have a lead officer responsibility. The capability that the Council is deploying, supported by Commission services and other partners, is very much multi-agency, as would befit an appropriate response to what are often very, very complex issues. You can see the data set there in terms of the per 100,000 population, which is further unpacked down in terms of what we're actually seeing in a practical sense on our streets in terms of the regular street counts that we do. We do a monthly street count, but there is daily deployment on the street through the street support team. And you'll see a reference there to the average number of people who we see on a month-by-month basis. It's quite a transient population in a lot of respects. Some people rough sleeping on a few nights a week. Some people rough sleeping quite significantly, and they're not. We've got a really good understanding, I think, of the challenges within that particular population group. So in terms of the statistics, I'll leave that one there. Happy to obviously pick up any further questions. If I can move on, if that's okay, Chair, to talk about antisocial behaviour. I think the key thing there is that, going back to the Chair's point about statistics, they tell part of a story. You will see, for instance, quite a significant increase in terms of the Council ASB recorded incidents. If that's a particular area you'd like to explore, we can outline what we think is happening in that particular area. You've also got some police data there as well, which is year on year in terms of comparisons. And there is a direct link as well to, in terms of this conversation, how we deal with domestic noise nuisance. So it's domestic noise nuisance, and we have some capabilities around that as well. The recording of that information has changed recently, which is why there isn't a year-on-year comparison, but we do have some professional expertise we can talk to. There's also some data in and around hate crime. The headline, this really does speak to the point, I think, that the Chair has raised around statistics. A 13% reduction. We are seeing some interesting things taking place within the basket, if I can say that, of hate crime, particularly in relation to anti-Muslim prejudice and anti-Semitism. But overall, we've got a recorded reduction there. And then the last key area is in relation to another perennial community safety priority. Always has been and always will be in terms of our response to domestic violence and abuse. Just turning those numbers, those big numbers there, in terms of something that you can get your heads around. We are typically talking about 60 to 61 recorded domestic violence incidents per day being reported to the police that we are responding to once the initial police deployment has taken place in a number of ways, through our DRAM process and through our MARAC processes, and looking to ensure that care plans are in place for victims and survivors of domestic abuse. Maybe if I stop there, and apologies if I maybe went into a bit too much detail for colleagues there, Chair, but it is a complex picture.
It is the first meeting, Paul, so you're allowed a certain... yeah. So, please, I'll remind officers as well, we do have newly elected members here on the membership, so we also need to be careful of jargon and acronyms when we're talking about stuff. So I'm going to start off by going through the rough sleeping KPI. Do we have any questions on the rough sleeping? Councillor Harrington.
Thanks, Paul. The question I have really is that previously the drug use within the rough sleeping community was focused on heroin and methadone substitute. We understand now that it's a lot more about the use of spice, and there doesn't appear to be a substitute for that. Can you just sort of elucidate what's actually happening to support those people? Because obviously acts of antisocial behaviour are increased because of the reaction to that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Councillor Harrington, and you're right in the sense of the increasing prevalence of spice and other psychoactive substances, actually, but spice is a significant problem for us. That's not to dismiss the use of opiates. The use of opiates is still very strong within sections of that particular population. And in terms of our partnership work that I alluded to, didn't reference them specifically, but we benefit in the city from working really closely with a commissioned organisation called Forward Leeds. They have a tremendous track record actually nationally in terms of supporting people with substance addiction issues, and Forward Leeds are a component part of the street support team I referenced before, that multi-agency response. Moving specifically to your point, Councillor Harrington, there are a number of trial projects. Some have been commissioned and some are being looked at in terms of a pathway for individuals who are struggling with an addiction to spice. There isn't as yet a defined programme in the way there is with methadone and opiates, but we are working very closely with our public health colleagues. Just to share as well, one of the significant benefits in recent weeks has been the effective merging of public health into the directorate that Temitopia has responsibility for. So in some respects, whilst the work was really close already, we see opportunities to maybe enhance that partnership work and seek to address once and for all, if you like, Councillor Harrington, the issue that you've raised. We are tackling it, but we haven't quite got to that point yet where we've got that absolute pathway.
Can I just ask that we can have some information around the prevalence of rough sleeping outside of the city centre? Because I think this is one of the areas where everyone assumes it's a city centre problem, but actually there might be presence of this within our communities that councillors should be aware of, if they're not already. Thank you. Councillor Ray.
I think I heard there that homelessness is often seen from the general public, that it's a problem for the public, whereas actually it's a problem for the homeless person, and that we're focusing on that. And I was wondering, is it perception versus reality, that a lot of the issues are actually people assuming that this person's responsible for maybe thefts or anything, and how much of it is actually backed up by statistics? And in my day job, I've just had an instance of this where a chap is rough sleeping sometimes on our farm where he has an allotment, and the response has been phenomenal, I have to say, with the efforts to locate him and make sure that his mental health's okay. But we have had some really nasty responses from other allotment holders, and actually he's caused no problems whatsoever.
Yeah, thanks for that question. And I think that to some degree unpicks what I said at the start in terms of how we're looking to approach the group of people who are unfortunate enough to feel that they need to rough sleep. There are some systemic challenges that we're working through, not least the one I just talked about there with Councillor Harrington's question, and where we do have community safety issues and antisocial behaviour, then I think the public would expect that we respond to that in an appropriate way. But the overwhelming issue here is around vulnerability and around the poor health and life outcomes that is pretty typical across this cohort of people. And we're drawing a distinction here between a couple of things. We're drawing a distinction between the people who are coming into the city to beg and just beg. They're not rough sleeping. They appear to be rough sleeping, but we know that they're not rough sleeping. They're coming in for financial gain. We're also drawing the distinction between rough sleeping and homelessness, and I think housing colleagues would want me to make that point. Rough sleeping is probably about 1% of the homelessness challenge we've got in the city. I don't think that's statistically defined, but it's a really small cohort of people, as you can see with the numbers that we're talking about here, and a lot of homelessness is hidden. This isn't hidden. It's very visible on our streets. I'm pleased to hear about, I think I'm pleased to hear about the response in terms of the issue that you experienced in your ward. And what I would say as well is, going back to the Chair's point, whilst we have a prevalence in the city centre, that prevalence I think is driven primarily by the need to, often the need to find money to support a substance addiction issue. That can lead to criminality and antisocial behaviour in and of itself, but it also leads to people being preyed upon by, for instance, organised crime groups who know there's a population that's vulnerable to things like substance misuse. So it's really, really complex. We do have a really good understanding of the individuals on our, I'm using the word cohort, but the group of people who we are routinely engaging. The prevalence is in the city centre for the reasons I've said. We absolutely understand that it occurs elsewhere, and our response is citywide. So we have a close link with the local MPTs, and what I would suggest as a starting point, wherever you are made aware of homelessness in any of your wards or anywhere in the city, let us know and we will respond to it in a proportionate and appropriate way.
Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you. I'm pleased the report references the work with grassroots organisations on this agenda. So I'd just like some assurance about how that feeds into the statutory and other services, that they've got a place at the table, because obviously they're out there quite a lot, aren't they, and seeing things perhaps others don't see. So that was the first point. The second point, you did mention begging, which I appreciate is different to this, but the impact of begging, which is spreading now certainly into the suburbs, in some of our shopping centres, and it does concern residents. So I just wondered if there were a way of feeding that into these KPIs, because this is specifically about rough sleepers, but begging is an issue for our communities. Thank you.
Yeah, on the first point, Councillor Ritchie, just to, I mean, I won't go into the devil in the detail here, but there's really strong governance around the work that we're doing in this area. It actually extends to another similarly vulnerable groups, street sex workers. So we've got some consistent ways of kind of supporting people who find themselves in a situation where they are effectively living on street for whatever reason, because there's commonality in terms of often a life history of trauma, of disconnects with services, and we also recognise that some of those grassroots organisations you've referenced there, Councillor Ritchie, if I'm honest, have a presence and have a position of trust with some of the individuals we're talking about, that statutory services, despite how we're trying to approach this, often, I wouldn't say don't have, but we sometimes struggle with, and that could be to do with previous engagement with services. So we have a really close working relationship with those grassroots organisations. There's intelligence flow and information feeds in, and it genuinely allows me to sit here and say to you with some confidence, we understand what's going on with this particular group of people at an individual level, not at a group level. Some of the work we need to do is longitudinal in terms of changing some of those lifestyle habits, but we definitely approach it in that way. Would you just remind me of the second point that you mentioned? KPIs.
It was just around begging and how we get that perhaps so it's monitored by this on KPIs.
Yeah. You might be aware that a little while ago the Vagrancy Act was repealed. That was the primary statutory instrument, legal power, that was used to tackle some of the issues that you've talked about there, where it is causing antisocial behaviour, it is impacting on businesses and it is impacting on residents. There is some move within government to replace the Vagrancy Act. Forget the date of that act, but it was 1860 something, so you can get a sense of it probably was out of date and it needed to be revised. There's work going on in the Home Office and in government around some new legislation around begging, particularly where people are facilitating people on the street. So more back to that organised crime. That's that kind of way of causing antisocial behaviour and a nuisance on street. In the meantime, what we look to do is use antisocial behaviour legislation as a tool for helping initially, actually, educate and encourage people not to do that kind of thing. If that doesn't work, then we move into a more of an enforcement focus, because ultimately that's what we need to do in many of the circumstances. I wonder if I could just ask my colleague Claire maybe to just unpack a little bit what that ASB legislation is about and what opportunities it gives us to address the issue you've raised.
Just to add in there, it's more around behaviour change. So there is legislation that's available to us that we can use, but we have to be careful about what we can do on the back of a breach, because there's no point as looking at a breach and then issuing somebody a fixed penalty notice when they're on the street and they're begging because they don't necessarily have the funds. So we obviously each individual case on its own merit, but we more look to tackle aggressive begging more than a passive begging. So if somebody's aggressively begging, that can kind of get referred through to my team, and we'll look to engage with the individual around that behaviour change and the consequences. If it does continue, that the aggressive begging does continue, we will look at an enforcement route, and we'll work with West Yorkshire Police and maybe look at a criminal behaviour order, but that's based on the evidence we can get. But our initial response is to look at changing that behaviour, trying to get them engaged with support, trying to get them the help they need, and it's only as a last resort we will look at the enforcement element, and that's for those that are able to engage but choose not to and continue to aggressively beg. Then we will tackle that behaviour with community protection, warnings or notices initially, which we wouldn't look to then issue a fixed penalty notice, because that's not going to work, because that's going to be breached straight away. So we will look at more the prosecution powers around that.
Yeah, we might need to have a look at that when we have the police in July, in terms of how, for instance, those individuals are identified to receive that attention if they're approaching strangers who don't know who they are. Right, Councillor Fisher.
Yes, thank you. I'm just interested when it comes to this data, that there is no data on the age ranges of these individuals. Now, I understand that's probably incredibly difficult to collect, for lots of different reasons. But with the growing concern around not in employment and training figures, but also understanding that supporting a 20-year-old is very different to supporting a 60-year-old. I just wondered if we have that data. It might be me that I've missed it, but also how we can use that data to best support these individuals.
Yeah, thank you. It's a really good question, and I know the data is not necessarily reported here. I understand why you're asking the question, and we do have the data. We have a really good understanding of. I mean, obviously, we do from time to time see people coming into the city who are new to the city, but by and large, this group of people are well known to services. They're well known to us. I'm really pleased to say that in terms of the cohort, we do not see very many young people featuring in our cohort, if at all, on our counts. So that is a really positive thing. We also have quite an interesting gender mix. It is mainly a male cohort of individuals, not exclusively, and women obviously found rough sleeping. Again, there are additional vulnerabilities that we're dealing with in that circumstance, but it's overwhelmingly. I will generalise now, but just to give you a sense of it, people in their kind of late 20s into their early 40s. Tends to be males, very few young people, and if we did ever come across a young person, and there have been circumstances where we have, that's usually been due to a really unusual set of circumstances, and the intervention there would be around child protection. If that ever happened. It's happened, I can count on one hand how many times that's happened since 2018 when I've been involved in this work. But that's the demographic. There's a lot more information that sits underneath that, and be happy to share that in any forum you like.
Thank you. Councillor Hannan has the final question on rough sleeping.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just a quick note. You mentioned about begging like petrol stations and shopping centres. However, there is an increase of begging at traffic lights, especially at busy intersections. One example is Claypit Lane. Now, that is one of the busiest intersections in Leeds. And on a typical day, either way, you'll see somebody coming out in the street and trying to beg. And on a recent journey, I encountered 3 people at traffic lights going from Headingley and Hyde Park to Oakwood, begging at traffic lights. I don't know if there is any data there or if you're addressing that, but there has definitely been a big increase, and I just worry for their safety. And if you look at some of these places, it looks like they're camped out at the traffic lights. So you can definitely identify where they are, but we definitely need to direct some resources there, because at the end of the day, it is going to be their safety, especially around Claypit Lane.
Yeah, it looks like begging is a line of inquiry which has, what's the word, a very salience for everybody on the board at the moment. That might be something we follow up. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that, Councillor Hannan. Yes, Councillor Flint.
I just wanted to come in on the back of what Paul was saying. It's a really interesting conversation for me. I worked for years with the Joanna Project, working with street sex workers, and encountered a lot of the work with Forward Leeds and the homeless community, and just the work has come on so far. Like coming back in this role, you know, the partnership working and the role of the third sector has changed so much, and there's so much to be proud of in Leeds. Like the third sector who know these people really well are absolutely sort of key to the conversations, and just maybe it would be good to get Forward Leeds here. Like some of the work they're doing with the most kind of vulnerable communities is amazing outreach work, and it's respected kind of nationally, really innovative. And there's a lot of work around sort of peer-led work going on at the moment that is some of the most effective work. You know, people with lived experience reaching out to people. And just on the rough sleepers front, like just because we can't see the women day to day, they are there. And it's often really hidden. So there's still work to do around finding them, and it's our responsibility to do so. But just wanted to add that.
Thank you very much. So we'll now move on to our second KPI, and I'm just reminding members that we've only got through one so far, and there are several on our list. Antisocial behaviour incidents. Do we have any questions on antisocial behaviour? Councillor Ray.
This one, my experience hasn't been quite so good. There is a perception, I think, around community that people are able to sidestep the systems, but especially around LASBAT and things, it's often described as tit for tat, and there doesn't seem to be often a willingness to deal with some things, and I just wondered what your thoughts were on that perception.
Just in response to that, obviously I don't know about the individual specific circumstances of the case you're talking about. It's sometimes really hard with the evidence. We have to have evidence to be able to take action against individuals. And again, we're kind of trying to move away from that model.
Claire, could you bring your microphone a little bit further forward, please? Thanks.
Is that better? Yeah, thanks. So, like I say, I'm not sure about the individual case you're talking about there, but it is based on evidence. We have to have the evidence to be able to take action against individuals. We do look at initially around that engagement with individuals to try and resolve at an early stage around mediation. That we have a mediation team that's within the service. So before kind of trying to take any action, we're around sustaining tenancies if it's Leeds City Council. If it's obviously it's slightly more complex if it's outside of a Leeds City Council tenancy, because we don't have a tenancy agreement to be able to kind of work towards, but it is based on that evidence. If there is evidence and you feel that there's an individual case where action hasn't been taken, more than willing for a conversation outside here, because I would expect where there is evidence, action to be taken against individuals.
Paul?
Yeah, just obviously just second what Claire's just said there. Just probably the other thing to add in terms of each and every single case that's reported to us, we have a triage process. It doesn't matter whether it's reported into a community safety team, LASBAT or housing, wherever it's reported, it all comes to one central point where it's triaged, and we apply in that triage a process. We call it Thrive, but it's really around looking at, based on the information, what are the threats and who are those threats to, what are the risks, and how significant are those risks, what does the intervention need to look like in terms of those threats and risks, and what vulnerability are we identifying in either perpetrator or victim. And often, as Claire has said, what we're finding, particularly with neighbourhood disputes, which accounts for actually quite a significant number of the increase we've seen in ASB. So what we typically call low-level neighbourhood disputes, but they're actually not low-level if you're involved in them, or if you're on the street, they're not low-level then, but we still apply that process, and that then informs the intervention. And that's then when we get to I think Claire's substantive point. We can only really work with the evidence and the information that we've got, but clearly happy to review any case that you might have in mind.
Can I ask a question on this one? Oftentimes, when we're talking to housing managers about this issue, they will explain that they don't issue any sanctions anymore because it's highly unlikely that that sanction will be met. And so it feels like there aren't any consequences to bad behaviour. And sometimes they'll say it's very hard to get somebody evicted if they are deemed vulnerable, because even if the council puts together a case and takes it to court, the judge will always recognise the vulnerability above the behaviour. So what do we hope to change to enable those who aren't behaving appropriately to be encouraged to not do so with something a little bit further than just depending on them changing their nature?
I totally appreciate the frustrations sometimes. We have to take into account public sector equality duty in any case we deal with. But public sector equality duty doesn't stop us taking action. It's just that we have to be considerate of those vulnerabilities. It is quite difficult sometimes when it gets to court, if a case is quite complex, there's high level vulnerabilities, but my expectation would be that we'd addressed all those issues whilst going through the case. I'm quite disappointed if a housing manager has stated that they wouldn't look at any sanctions on the back of not being able to take a case further, because there's so many different options for us to look at. And this is obviously one of the positives around public health, again, coming into our service, so that's a service that we'll kind of be able to work with. We'll be able to consult with around our policies and processes as well. So I would be disappointed to know that no sanctions were being looked at for an individual that has got any kind of vulnerabilities, because there is sanctions we should be looking at. The only difficult, more complex areas that we do have is if somebody doesn't have capacity, but then is the expectation that there would be another partner that would be an advocate for them or work on their behalf. For example, adult social care that we're heavily engaged with. I'm aware of a case that we have where there was a high level of vulnerability, and we did actually manage to work with not necessarily look at eviction, but we worked with a number of services. We actually was able to move the tenant to an alternative area with a full support package in place. Unfortunately, staying in that area wasn't going to work because the relationship had broken down with the community, and that individual was never going to be able to progress there. But what we were able to do is work with a number of services within Leeds City Council, move to an alternative property where a full support package is in place. And my understanding is the last I heard about that case is the tenant is actually, the behaviour is improving. So, and again, if there's any individual specific cases you'd like me to look at, we are trying to look at doing some training as well with housing. We're working very, very closely, more than we probably ever have with housing at the moment, around our response to antisocial behaviour, and looking how we can kind of work more collaboratively together. We're having regular meetings with housing now on a monthly basis, so any case that kind of is due to come through to us, we're already aware of it, so we're already having those initial conversations, giving advice and support.
Thank you. Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, and I share the points that Councillor Galton made as well, in my experience, and also Councillor Ray's point. I think, but I will caveat by saying, we get casework when systems have failed, so it's not necessarily reflective of the whole service when you look at all those antisocial behaviour cases. However, the cases that we get brought to us obviously need some unpicking. So often there's lack of interventions and vulnerabilities are cited. Now, there's perhaps a potential solution, and I wondered if we could look at, there's something called the blue light approach, and there's an organisation, I think Alcohol Change UK, that offer support and training. I think some local authorities have signed up to it, and they do sort of assertive outreach because it's often a lack of engagement. So the things that would trigger this were multiple blue light call-outs, and if you could prevent those, you can sometimes, well, you'll save money in the long run for the police and for health and so on. So that's a potential solution I'd ask you to consider bringing in, the blue light approach. Thank you.
Temitope.
Thanks very much, Chair. I was also thinking our exec member for housing is here, but our chief officer for housing is not. But I'm sure if he was here, you've mentioned that in your casework, you often hear when cases go wrong. We recently had the regulator inspection for housing, and actually the connection between ASB and housing is nationally applauded for the partnership work. We know that we're never perfect and there's more to do, but I guess just to still have it on the minutes that this was actually flagged up as a really positive area, and Claire and the colleagues in housing continue to work together. So really hearing any individual cases, we definitely will take that in to work on further, but it is a really, really good partnership that's happening across ASB and housing as well.
Paul Money.
Thank you for the suggestion there in terms of, we're always looking, to be fair. I don't think in terms of tackling ASB we'll ever get to the end of the journey. We are always looking for options and interventions that can address particular issues, be them long-standing ones or emerging issues around ASB, perhaps for another forum, but we'll happily pick up the suggestion that you've made there. I think we are aware of it, but happy to engage on any ideas, actually, in terms of how we work together to tackle some of the systemic community-based ASB issues.
Thank you. Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly to follow on from Timmy Torpey and the other chief officers. If you do have any difficult cases, in housing, please email to me, and I will look into it as well. And also, we will pick this up as well, as Timmy Torpey says. And there's a fantastic partnership approach work that's taking place as well. But there is some more improvement to be taking place. So I will make sure that will be on our agenda as well, in our discussion as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I note that in the KPI, you talk about antisocial behaviour incident volume, West Yorkshire reported figures going up 6%, obviously. I suggest we have a discussion about that when the police are here in July to see how that reflects in terms of policing numbers matching antisocial behaviour rates, potentially. But further down, you talk about what is looked after by the Antisocial Behaviour Service for Leeds City Council, which we would appreciate the majority of that is associated with council housing tenants. It also talks about domestic noise nuisance incidents, and they have now been differentiated, but they weren't previously because we haven't got any comparative data. Is there a particular reason for that, and is there a particular reason why we don't have any measurement of noise-related disturbance which is non-domestic?
Just coming in on the noise nuisance, it's due to a case management change. So the council is working towards the dynamic system, which we are piloting within our area with regards to noise nuisance. So noise nuisance is not being reported in our old case management system, and the dynamic system is not at a place yet where we're able to pull off any reporting.
And the non-domestic noise?
Any non-domestic noise, do you mean like licensing? Because we wouldn't necessarily have that data around non-domestic because it doesn't come within our service.
Yes, but in terms of communities, they are just as affected by noise if it comes from a private operator as it is from a neighbour, and that is of interest. So are you saying it doesn't get measured?
It doesn't get reported through to our team, but I can ensure going forward for any future meetings we can have the non-domestic noise added onto that.
Paul?
Yeah, sorry, just to qualify, I think there is a substantive point here in terms of what's happening in communities and being able to articulate that from a noise perspective. If you're suffering from noise, you're suffering from noise. As it stands at the moment, a chief officer colleague working in our directorate picks up non-domestic noise in terms of a response. Appreciate we haven't provided that context here, but we could do in the future. There is the data available to us. It just doesn't sit with us as a team.
Okay. I'm not sure which scrutiny board that team comes under at the moment, Becky, but you can look into it. Councillor Chahan.
I think that comes under, oops. I think it comes under the environment team, I believe.
Yes, but I'm not sure if it reports anywhere at the moment. Do you see what I mean? So we might be reporting half of noise, but the other half of noise isn't going to any other committee. So it might be one of the things that we might want to look at, particularly since that team that you're talking about doesn't have any monitoring of noise after 5 p.m, which is when most noise happens. So, and I think somewhere it needs to be looked at, doesn't it, really? Okay, can I also ask about something else since we're on this item? I've recently had casework, and I'm not sure if other people have, where there are devices which are used by residents to be antisocial with their neighbours, which are not noisy, but they deliver vibration. And we as a council are not able to measure vibration in the way that we do as noise. And I wondered if I have reported it to my housing people, but I don't think they're interested in, or they haven't got the remit to look into it. I think that might be something which is interesting for the service to report back on us outside of the scrutiny process, if that's all right, because it looks like it might be a growth area, because you can buy these devices on Amazon. Okay, thanks very much. Shall we move on to our next one, which is hate crime incidents? Any questions on hate crime incidents? We did have an in-depth investigation into this under the last scrutiny board, so I appreciate that some members will already have that information at hand. How about domestic violence? Councillor Ritchie.
Yeah, thank you. Is that on you? I think the figures do need unpicking, because you did allude to a rise in anti-Muslim prejudice and anti-Semitism, and yet the figures recorded are down. So what have we seen a drop in? I mean, we know it's massively underreported anyway, disability, hate crime and what have you, but where has the drop come then? You know, can we have a bit more detail in the data, please? Thank you.
Yeah, I can take that way as a general point. The headline figure is sometimes useful, it's sometimes not particularly helpful. We have seen, the first thing I think to say about hate crime is there is a massive underreporting issue. That's the first thing to say, right across the board. And that would be our start point, certainly in terms of the council's response to hate crime, which is around early intervention and prevention. Clearly we have a close partnership with the police in terms of investigation and enforcement as well. But I see the figure as a 13% reduction. Nobody is for 1 minute thinking that is anything other than a statistical fact. That's just the fact in terms of what's being reported to the police. Most, if not all, of the other areas under the protected characteristics have seen a reduction. Faith and religion-based hate is the one that's really peaking. But even then, in terms of the numbers that are being reported, we know the numbers are probably the tip of the iceberg in terms of what is actually happening. So big percentage increases in anti-Semitism and big volume increases in terms of anti-Muslim prejudice, reflective of the different population sizes that we're talking about. As the Chair alluded to, Councillor Ritchie, there is a really structured process. There's 5 kind of key pillars that we are working on in and amongst the strategy that's been referenced there, which is about understanding the issue and what's going on in Leeds, notwithstanding what the statistic there is saying, and also what our response needs to be. And at the end of it, whatever it is, it needs to be really victim-focused. I have a raft of other information and data that I can share. This is just the figure that we are asked to report on. I guess to start the conversation. But there is a lot of other information in terms of statistics underneath that. There are some challenges as well in terms of when we look at faith and religion-based hate, disaggregating within different areas. And often what we see is a particular spike in reported offences after nationally significant issues, let's say. So in recent weeks, we've seen a rise in Sikh-related hate, for instance, and I think we understand why that is. So there is a good understanding. I appreciate it's not necessarily here now. There's a lot of detail here that I'd be happy to share in whatever way we think might be appropriate.
Obviously, we can have another go in July when we get the police reports on this as well. So, sorry, we're moving on to domestic violence. Lack of questions, by the way, is not seen as a lack of interest. It might be that actually the reporting that we have is we're satisfied with it and we endorse the approach of the council in its response to it. Do we have any questions on domestic violence? Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this report, Paul. I'm pleased that domestic violence is included in this. By its nature, it's not as public, it's not as visible, and it's rarely raised in public meetings with us. But we know the impact that domestic violence has on particularly on women, on families, on children, and on communities. But I'm just wondering whether, as a scrutiny board, we need something a bit more nuanced than this headline indicator that will give us some idea of the impact on children and on the victims. So, for example, the number of children's services interventions that happen as a result of this, or death or serious injury resulting from this, just to give it a bit more, give us a bit more understanding of what is meant by a domestic violence incident. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's more than okay. It's absolutely reasonable. I do wonder about whether, and obviously it's a matter for this board, but we do have our annual kind of update where we talk about the work that we're doing across the city around a number of themes. Often spinning off that, as has been discussed with the hate crime, is a particular deep dive. All I would say to you about domestic violence is what you've articulated there is absolutely the situation that we are seeing. The stats here only tell so much of a story. In fact, the statistics across the board, and a bit like what I said about hate crime, we have all that data around repeat incidents, how many high risk, medium risk, low risk, how many safety plans have we, and it's thousands of interventions. We do have all that and can share it. We also benefit in the city from I won't mention governance too much, but we do have a Domestic Abuse Local Partnership Board. It's chaired by Councillor Harland, and it is a really strategic multi-agency focus, which includes representation with lived experience. So we are shaping our policies as we move along by the very experiences you've talked about, just in terms of victims. And you're probably aware, I'm guessing from the nature of the question, that every incident that takes place where the child is present, as far as we're concerned, a child is a victim. And so there are lots and lots of other information sources that might be helpful to you in terms of understanding what we're doing and where there might be some gaps in terms of your sense of it. So a bit like the last question, be more than happy to kind of share that information with you in whatever way to reassure you about certainly the nature of what you've talked about, including the domestic homicide reviews and where we are with those, with the statutory obligation to report within a meaningful time frame back to Home Office about what the learning is across the system in every one of those instances. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head now, but there's always a number of those running at any one time in the city, and so we've got a team focused on that as well.
Thanks. I think that's a welcome perspective, because we're basically given a bunch of stats, and we look at the percentage change, and in this particular instance, it looks like it's plateauing and not going down, and it's 10 times the number of domestic violence reports here than hate crime stats as well. And I think it might be one of those ones where just having some disaggregated information would be quite useful to bring home the issue, and it might mean that in our localities, if we have what's the word? The group that you are associated with, Councillor Harland, we don't know what it does generally outside of its membership, but it might have some messaging, for instance, which is best delivered at a community level. I think it would also be quite useful for us when we're looking at neighbourhood policing to potentially get an understanding of what different crimes constitute a ratio of their time, because we have had issues in the past, haven't we, with childhood sexual exploitation, for instance. There was a time when the police were saying that was taking up to 30% of their time. It would be interesting, for instance, to understand how much of their time is taken up tackling domestic violence, as opposed to some of the other issues that we've been looking at today. I think that would be quite a useful exercise for us to look at. Councillor Martin.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, just to give a bit more context, at our regular police and communities together meetings, our packed meetings where the police come to Roundhay and present statistics, they do present some sort of, I can't remember how it's described, but it's a hint of the numbers of domestic violence incidents. But they're not able to go into as much detail about what this means and what's happening and how they're responding as they are to the acquisitive crime, for instance. So, yes, I do want to know more, and I'm pleased that, you know, people are looking at it at a citywide level, but yes, please, more detail at a local level. Thank you.
I was just going to say, I thought that was the end of the coverage of what's in my portfolio. I don't know if you've... But to come in on the back of that, I think the Women's Voice project, which is victim survivors that have worked really closely with us and the police to change the attitude to how these victim survivors are dealt with. I'm sure they'd love to come and talk to you. But what I was going to say, we recognise, you must recognise there's so much great work going on. We know there's much more to do, but I would like to thank officers that are working on this. They are very innovative, always on the front foot, always looking and searching for solutions to issues that sometimes are under the radar, so they are on the front foot. So I'd like to thank the officers, but also our partners in the third sector, such as the Women's Voice Project, and lots going on in this area. But also there's lots of new members, not just to the board, but new members to council. I'm happy for any aspects in my area that you want more in-depth knowledge of. I'm happy to set up briefings or working groups or whatever, because they are doing lots of great work. Sometimes their hands are tied with what they can do and what they can't do, and it'd be nice to get out there as well what they are able to help you with and what not, but happy to do that.
Thank you. Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you. Yeah, once again, I get a lot of domestic abuse cases, and they are the cases where they're not satisfied with how they've been dealt with. You know, often the other side will make counter allegations that then seem to be investigated more closely than the victim, who's typically been a woman, the initial victim. And another growing issue is around post-separation abuse, particularly when children are involved. So they may have split up, moved out, but the abuse continues, and that's proving particularly tricky to unpick for, like, the police and what have you in terms of evidence gathering. Now, there is Sheffield City Council, and it's endorsed by the NSPC, something called, and I hope I'm saying this correctly, the Duluth Post-Separation Wheel. And I did ask in February if we used that, practitioners used that in Leeds, and I didn't actually get an answer to that. So I'm taking this opportunity to raise that today. And the other thing I would mention is there was, I'm going back when I was on a previous iteration of this board, and there was an offenders programme, particularly for men, male perpetrators, and I believe that may have been scrapped due to budget cuts, but if it proved successful in repeat offences, perhaps that's something we should revisit if I'm correct and it's not operating. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Rich. Couple of points. I think you're referring to the Duluth power and control wheel. I think that's something that we are familiar with within our team, and it is used by practitioners in Leeds with regards to their response. I can provide you with a bit more detail on that if you need it, but we are familiar with it in terms of a tool, and it is used. I think in terms of perceptions around how incidents are dealt with, I think I'd go back to Claire's point. Often there are some real complex issues playing out here in terms of particular relationships. Notwithstanding that, we focus as much as we can on being victim-led. There will be cases where people are potentially dissatisfied. What I would say is it's specialist resources from within the council, it's specialist resources from within West Yorkshire Police, and the focus is on safeguarding, not on criminal investigation. It's on safeguarding, which is, I think, where this issue really actually needs to be sat. We won't get all cases right. I absolutely accept that, but there is a real priority on this issue, an overwhelming priority to do the right thing. And in terms of your point about perpetrator programmes, you are right in the sense of we are looking now with partners around reinitiating a perpetrator programme. I'm not entirely certain what all the reasons were for the fact that the previous one was stopped. You're right, it isn't running now. We think in a city like Leeds we need one, and we're in conversations with key partners now about commissioning the right one that actually is fit for a place, size and scale of Leeds. But a perpetrator programme should be part of our holistic response, and it will be moving forwards.
I think a more evaluative reporting would be really helpful, because it's good to know what initiatives have been attempted, what the results of those were, whether or not it was decided to put more resource into them or to end them because they weren't delivering the outcomes that we hoped. And that is really useful information to have in background reporting, especially if you're considering commissioning something new. Yeah, so that might be in the July paper, who knows? We'll look forward to seeing it. Councillor Ray.
I have lived experience of domestic violence. It's not something I talk about. I think it's something that's very shaming for the victims, a bit like sexual offences and rape and things like that. It's a really difficult thing. From my point of view, it's not just about the physical violence, it's about the coercive control. So, like Kevin said, the worst incident I had was actually when we'd split up. And my ex ended up with a caution. But his response to that was to tell me that when he'd been cautioned, the police found it funny and they were laughing with him about the circumstances and things. And, you know, I'm well aware that could be true, but I'm equally aware he could have made that up too. And so I think there is something really important about communicating this to the wider society and how we deal with these things and how this can be brought into the open more. And I think one of the things that really helped me, because I could never have told you about coercive control, was listening to the Archers, and there was that brilliant storyline and just how insidious it is and how it sort of ramps up bit by bit until you're in a place where you don't even know who you are. So I think there is a lot that can be done around education. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ray. It sounds like this might be a compelling issue for us to look into as a scrutiny board going forward. But we'll develop that going forward with the July meeting as well. Councillor Flynn, did you want to come in at that point?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Ray, for sharing that. Yeah, it's really moving, and sort of linked to a bit of what I was going to say. I just wanted to raise a couple of things. I don't think I'm really allowed to ask questions in my role, but one was about the increase in women coming forward and reporting historic domestic abuse, and how the kind of it being talked about more in public discourse. You mentioned the Archers. We had like 2 cases of casework of people coming to surgeries in the last 6 months who specifically talked about Giselle Pellico, and obviously a very extreme situation, but just her bravery in talking about her experience and how that moves and encourages women to feel safe to come and report. So I don't know if these are covered in the figures, whether the figures are just current or historic, and obviously it's sort of different how the police and organisations deal with historic abuse, but also really, really important, and it may be important to pull out in the figures that we've got. And then the other thing was about young people, and we know that there's significant increase in abuse in relationships with young people, and as you're saying about prevention, just the importance of education of health, what is a healthy relationship, because that young people are seeing a lot on social media, and there's a lot of good work going on. In this case, in July, myself and Councillor Hayden have pulled together a citywide meeting about misogyny for high schools and primary schools, and looking at good practice and what can be shared across the city in just improving our education for young people about healthy relationships particularly. So there is work going on, and there's obviously a lot to do, but I'm guessing that in these figures, I don't know if we know like the level of young people in them. Thank you.
Councillor Harlan, did you want to come in quickly as well before I respond to that?
Just to say, this morning I was at a performance by a group of actors from what's called Soundproof Box, which does work in schools, and it's called Red Flag. And this was for Year 8s through to Year 10s. We funded it through the Outer East Community Committee, and it was absolutely fabulous. And it was all about coercion and really participatory for the kids. It was lovely to see that the lads in there were probably the first with their hands up. And that's why I thought we're going to be a bit late, but I'll send you all the details of this Soundproof Box. It's absolutely brilliant. There's working in schools. Fantastic.
Thank you. I keep mentioning it, we've got the police coming in July, so all of these issues that we're raising, we can expand with them going forward. And it looks like domestic violence might be something that we look into. I'm also aware that this is a Communities and Equalities Scrutiny Board. We've also had discussions with our Equality section in terms of which areas it might be useful to look into. And one of the areas which the Council is hoping to develop, of course, is the area around misogyny. And we can offer the opportunity for some pre-decision scrutiny, which is where the value of scrutiny comes in most best, I would suggest. And that, alongside looking at domestic violence as an issue within our communities, might mean that we've got some joined up working, and at the end of the year we'll have something much more substantial than the sum of its parts. So that's just for your information. So some of these questions that we're asking, we haven't got an answer today, but it is something that we can work into our programme going forward. Right, thank you very much for that. We knew that the community safety issues were going to have the most attention from the KPIs going forward. But now we're going to move on to the next section of our KPI report, which is looking at welfare and benefits. And we have David Fryer here to introduce this.
Is that working? Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm here to represent welfare and benefits. As the report says, my service deliver an array of financial support to low-income households across Leeds, and that includes housing benefit, council tax support, local welfare support and related crisis support, discretionary housing payments and free school meals. I think I should say I think the biggest challenge for us as a service is to maximise the financial support that we can deliver to residents in Leeds within the remit of the budgets that we have and the relevant rules and regulations that apply to those benefits. The report outlines some of the notable highlights for the year. I'd just like to, if I may, just draw attention to a couple of those. Firstly, the work that we're doing around pension credit take-up in the city. So this isn't actually a benefit that we administer in Leeds, it's a Department for Work and Pensions benefit. But we noticed that we could use some of the data that we have at our disposal to identify pensioners who perhaps will be eligible for pension credits. So as a result of that work, last year, we did some work which resulted in 203 successful claims for pension credit. So that work generated an average weekly award of £75 per week for those successful claimants. Altogether, as a result of that work, we've managed to secure pension credit for 417 residents in Leeds, which totals over 1.6 million in terms of combined annual income. So I think that's a really great piece of work by the service, and as I say, it's not linked to our kind of day-to-day business. Also, a relatively new area for us was the delivery of the Household Support Fund. So that's linked to that is local welfare support as well. So what we're doing is delivering crisis support to residents in the city. So we've developed a kind of a claim process for that and criteria, and that had to be, the criteria had to be aligned to the kind of limited budget that we've got. So I'm pleased to say that we spent our budget in its entirety to be able to support people in Leeds, and that was, the support was through things like discretionary housing payments, giving people furniture, white goods, money for food and fuel, and just generally helping people who are in a crisis. So just in terms of KPIs, despite the kind of array of support we provide, our main KPI is our speed of processing for housing benefit. Now we administer housing benefit on behalf of central government. And the speed of processing is used as a benchmark to kind of compare our performance with other cities. So I think it's worth noting that the speed of processing measures the time it takes from us receiving a claim or a reported change to actually getting that claim processed and getting that payment sent out or getting that change done in the system. And that time includes the time it will take for a resident to provide the information that's needed. So I think it's worth noting that sometimes we're waiting for customers to provide information. Our speed of processing performance is consistently good across the years. This year, every quarter I meet with the Department for Work and Pensions, and they give us some analysis on our performance, and they're always very complimentary. This year we started off a little bit slower than usual because we had some additional work to undertake. We were mandated by the Department for Work and Pensions to undertake some review activity on over 4,000 pensioner claims. And because of the vulnerable nature of that client group, we allowed pensioners more time to provide us the information that was needed. And as a result of that, we took a hit on our speed of processing, but thought that was the right decision. Also, because of the vulnerable nature of the client group, we kind of front-loaded all of that activity to the beginning of the year because we had to get it done within 12 months. So that meant there was an additional pressure for the service during the first 3 to 6 months of the year. But I'm pleased to be able to report that during quarters 3 and 4, as you can see in the report, our speed of processing greatly improved. And actually during quarter 3, which are the latest national available figures, our speed of processing for new claims was the second best of all the core cities. And we actually improved on that during quarter 4, but we haven't had the national performance statistics released yet. So I think that gives you a very brief overview of where we are in welfare and benefits. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, any questions for
You mentioned lack of questions not seen as a negative. I hope multiple questions aren't seen as a negative either, but when you're outside the tent, you need to take these opportunities to raise matters, and I do raise matters on email as well directly when they need escalating. Anyway, I think this department is a real success, and I always find them really helpful, David, so credit to your team for that. What I want to raise is two things. One on the impact of the errors by Universal Credit during this migration period. Are you finding a lot of issues around there that we're having to pick up? Because the last government took away the councillor hotline to DWP. So we either have to go through welfare rights or our MPs to escalate cases. And the process seems frustratingly slow. So I wondered if there was a knock-on for your service with those things. And the other thing that caught my eye is the Macmillan reduction in Macmillan support for cancer sufferers. And I just wondered what the background was behind that. Is that are the charities struggling, or have they got a different focus that's left us in that position? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Regarding the Macmillan welfare rights support, I think I'll pass that on to my colleague Nick to answer, because that's actually a welfare rights issue which I don't manage. In terms of universal credit, I think it's fair to say that we have seen impacts on residents. We don't measure these, so we don't have any. I can't provide you with any kind of figures, but anecdotally, we've certainly seen people who are impacted by the migration to universal credit, mostly around delays in receiving the universal credit awards. What we don't know is the reasons behind those delays. I mean, they may arise because of processing delays. It could be because of people being unclear about what they need to provide in support of their applications. But certainly some of the support that we deliver through our crisis support schemes has been directed to people who have had a temporary loss of income because they're waiting for universal credit to be awarded.
Nick,
yeah,
when you come in, can you introduce your other KPIs as well? Because
sure.
It looks like the conversation is organic and the two cross over. So
no worries. I'll answer the Macmillan question first, and then I'll introduce my section, if that's okay, Chair. So in answer to your question, Councillor Ritchie, it's a real shame about the Macmillan funding reducing, I think, because it's been a very successful service area within welfare rights for quite a few years. I think Macmillan they're a national charity. The honest reality is their donation levels have dropped quite drastically, so they don't have the same funding envelope available to commissioners in the same way that they have done in recent years. So they've moved from a local authority sort of level commissioning model to a regional model. So that regional model means the money will go to Northumberland CAB, who have then approached us as a council to say, can you deliver this work with us? But it means we'll move from 2 workers to 1 worker. But there's a sort of triage aspect to the work that Northumberland CAB will do. This is all to be determined, so there's a bit more detail to thrash out yet. But there'll be a triage level. The people that we can't support because we haven't got the same caseload capability anymore, in theory we can put through into that triage, and Northumberland CAB or other partners can pick up. But obviously that'll be channel shifted in digital or telephone. So it is a shame that's dropped, but that's the backdrop to it. So in terms of my service areas as a whole, if that's okay to go on to that, Chair. So I'll provide a summary of each in turn. So my service areas are job shops, which is free light touch or case-loaded employment support for our residents, welfare rights, of which Macmillan is part of, and then customer services and library areas. So just to give a little bit of a summary for each of those, starting with the job shops. So in 25-26, in total, 4,422 individual customers registered for job shop support, with an additional 699 accessing support from attending dedicated recruitment events that we hold across the city. That represents an increase of 1.5% on last year, so that's 5,043 customers. The job shops received 14,882 visits from those registered, and we count that as our throughput. So that might be a customer started with a job shop, but they come back to us multiple times, if that makes sense. And then in terms of the most important outcome, the services perform very strongly yet again. So we have a target of 1,000 people into work each year, and we've surpassed that this year with 1,053 people into work across the city. So in terms of welfare rights, the welfare rights purpose is to reduce financial stress, maximise benefit uptake and increase independence for our customers. The two main areas to summarise here, but there's a bit more detail in the report itself, are substantial financial gains and increased benefit uptake. So for the substantial financial gains, welfare rights successfully increased incomes for clients. In the last 12 months, we've seen a year-on-year increase from 28.12 million last time we reported to Scrutiny to 30.4 million gains in 25-26. So on average, that's 1,178 benefit gains, pounds benefit gains were secured for each client advised. This was an increase on the average figures in 24-25 of 1,066 and in 23-24 of 985. So just to repeat that, 30 million back into people's pockets, you know, not to be sniffed at, huge amounts that we're supporting people with. And then increased benefit uptake, 3,073 clients were assisted with benefit checks in 25-26. This support helped people access entitlements such as personal and independent payments. You might see that as PIP in the report, or have heard it referred to as PIP before, and council tax support, for example, for which many were eligible but not receiving. Following our input, they now are. And then lastly, customer services and library services. So these are the face-to-face services for council support to residents, delivered from 37 sites across the city. In 25-26, Community Hub's footfall was 568,000, with 95,776 service requests being raised across multiple areas. If there's a level of interest, the highest inquiry type area is housing, followed by council tax and then welfare and benefits. But housing and council tax are predominantly the most busy inquiry areas for us. Our libraries, by comparison, are a statutory service offering a range of universal services both on-site and online, providing free access to books, music, films and information and resources. At the end of 25-26, the service had 119,302 active members and had issued 1,285,918 books and facilitated usage of 81,052 e-books and 159,222 e-audio books. And the service attracted 29,773 new members, and that's my summary, Chair.
Thanks. I think this is a great example of we can be overwhelmed with figures sometimes, which sound quite big, but they might mask something behind them. So, for instance, I haven't got anything to compare those figures that you've just mentioned. I don't know if library membership has reduced by 20% in a year, or whether it's gone up 20% in a year. I'm not sure if the average number of books people are borrowing has gone up or gone down, and whether that makes any difference. So that's interesting figures, but they're just figures, and it would be really good to have a narrative in terms of where you are now, where you hope to be. So, for instance, one of the things I noticed was you talked about enabling people into 1,000. You'd gone over your target to get 1,000 new jobs or something, and I'm looking at the tables which talks about your job shops, and the bar charts are identical each year. So, does this reflect that you achieve 1,000 jobs every single year because of the number of staff that you've got that they're able to deliver 1,000 jobs, but it doesn't reflect how many people have asked for them or what the number of jobs available to get is. I don't understand, in terms of us understanding performance, how you set your target, because it sounds like, oh, we'll set a target to have the same number of jobs this year as we had last year and the year before, and so you haven't got a stretch target, for instance. I'd like to have a little bit more about that, and in terms of your libraries, how many members you want to have, whether it's gone down since you reduced the hours in quite a lot of libraries recently, whether that attendance is gone up under a certain demographic or it's gone down with a certain demographic. That's information which is quite useful to us to know how the situation is changing as opposed to how the situation is the same. Yeah? Have you got any of that information at hand, or is this something that we might want to look at later on in our work programme?
Yeah, I mean, I can bring year-by-year comparisons for libraries back later on, so I don't have that information to hand at the moment. In terms of the job shops, our target is set, because we work very closely with employment and skills colleagues, so the target's set based on the entire council employment hub work that takes place, and what employment and skills colleagues think is a realistic target for us to achieve. That typically does stay static at about 1,000 in all fairness, but I think that's an achievable rate. We overachieve on that, but we don't overachieve by a significant amount necessarily. In terms of stretch targets, we have about 49 officers across the service. They are targeted in terms of their job outcomes. We work very closely with them in terms of how they're tracking customers, the number of starts per site, those throughput figures. So we do ensure that we're getting the maximum output for the resource that we've got, and we work on that at a local level. It's very hard to bring back, the number of jobs that might be available for people to apply for example. But if you want us to provide a little bit more detail around the job shops, we can do.
Timmy Topi.
Thank you, and I think that's really helpful, Steer Chair. Just to add to what Nick said, our libraries are like our physical infrastructure for prevention. They are way more than just the book offer, and what we haven't done is showed all that is encompassed in the libraries, and I've been so impressed by stepping into the different libraries and seeing all the impact that they have, even the mobile libraries, the different council estates that they've gone to, the case stories that are there are really powerful, and I guess we haven't shown that as clearly here, so there's definitely something that we can bring back that shows more than the book offer, but really where we're moving to with prevention and the real importance of having these community hubs and libraries across Leeds as well, so we could do that too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for Nick? Okay, thanks very much. So there's plenty to go out there if we want to take a deeper dive, for instance, into libraries and their ability to deliver and the job. I'm not sure if do job shops and how we interact with the jobs market, does that come under economic development, or
if you're looking specifically at the job shops, that's this board. If you want to look at kind of economic development, that would be economy and inclusive growth, but you'd certainly be fine looking at job shops.
Nick?
So yeah, I mean, how we interact with the job market will more specifically come through employment and skills colleagues who have key account managers that work with some of the bigger employers in the city, but they'll also engage with the SME employers as well. So in terms of the pipeline of job opportunities, if you like, I know that's what you're interested in, Councillor Galton. We could work with employment and skills colleagues to get a little bit more information on that moving forward.
Yeah, I think it would be useful information to see how each of these community hubs, for instance, how many of them have delivered a job, or whether it's only certain ones that have, because they've got more information at hand. I don't know. Councillor Hannah.
A very quick one, Nick, regarding Headingley Hub. Can you pass on my thanks to some amazing staff that you've got there? And the hub is the heart of the community. Like We've just discussed they've got so much going on. But if you can just pass on our thanks, please, to that amazing team there.
I will do, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So we're moving on to our final KPI in terms of our contact centre performance, and Alicia Barker is here to talk to us about it.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll just run you through the highlights of the contact centre performance for the financial year 25-26. So during that period, the contact centre was offered 762,410 calls, and our average speed to answer those calls was 9 minutes and 28 seconds. We answered in total 77% of those calls that were offered. In addition to that volume of calls, the service also received 119,828 emails and 53,681 social media messages, which is primarily through Facebook Messenger. On page 55 of the full agenda pack, I've just popped in a few charts for you to see there. So the first one is the monthly breakdown of those calls, plotted against the monthly average speed to answer, so you can see the change in demand each month and how we're able to respond to them. So it averages out around 63,000 calls a month that are coming into the service, and you can see that average speed of answer is peaking in September and March, which are generally known peaks for us. In September, we see an increased demand on council tax. That's primarily due to students that are moving in and out of the city and trying to make those council tax arrangements. And in March, it's the end of the financial year, and we are starting to get contact in relation to annual billing. And there's also a little bit of increased activity on school admissions as we start approaching the offer days for primary and secondary. You'll notice the significant reduction in average speed to answer in December, and that does align with a reduction in demand generally in December. Average speed to answer was around 4 minutes, and that's generally just because we do have a closure period between Christmas and New Year, and customers are generally not prioritising contacting the council over that period. I've also provided for you a service breakdown of each of our lines, so you can see there the 23 service lines that the contact centre provides services for. Traditionally, there's not much change in the way that these services are ordered, so council tax, housing repair and adult social care continue to be the three biggest services that drive contact into the service. In terms of customer satisfaction, we received 12,756 pieces of feedback from customers in the last financial year, and overall 81% of customers said that they were very satisfied or satisfied with the service that they'd received from the contact centre. Slightly higher in terms of agent knowledge and empathy, at 83 and 84% respectively, and 71% of customers being satisfied or very satisfied with the time taken to answer the call. The chart that I've provided in terms of customer satisfaction just ranks the services from highest satisfaction to lowest. And I do think it's quite pleasing to point out that those three big services, adult social care, council tax and housing repair, do feature with satisfaction of 85% and over, despite the fact that they're our busiest services and so have the highest demand. In terms of some comparison data for you, just to help you understand that in relation to our performance last year, we did see an increase in demand in 25-26 of 5,719 calls, and we also had a slight increase in digital volumes of just under 3,000 calls last year. What that meant in terms of telephony performance is that the speed of answer declined, so we saw an increase in wait times by 4 minutes across the year, and the answer rate reducing from 87% to 76%, so a reduction overall of 11%. In terms of customer outcome, despite those increases in speed to answer, customer satisfaction scores actually improved and our complaint volumes reduced. So overall customer satisfaction increased from 79% in the previous financial year to 81% last year, and complaints reduced from 174 to 136. In terms of people, we did have some leavers in the service and that definitely impacted performance. So we were operating with 6 FTE fewer in 25-26 than we were on the previous year. And we did report slightly higher levels of sickness as well at the start of the year, which had an impact on performance around January time when demand was increasing on housing repair service. So overall, we're managing slightly higher demand with a slightly smaller workforce, and that has resulted in reduced answer rates and longer wait times, but that has been offset with improved customer satisfaction and fewer complaints. We have been recruiting to vacant positions, and we've had 10 new starters that have joined the team in May, and we've got a further 5 new starters that are currently in training with us now. We're already seeing the impact of those 10 new starters that have been assigned to the housing service. So currently average speed to answer in June is running at 7 minutes and 32 seconds. And that we anticipate that will further improve as those officers become more proficient as they settle into the role.
Great, thank you. Any questions for Alicia? I have some. I noticed you've on Appendix 1 on page 56, it has customer satisfaction, service breakdown. And we've just had a report from Welfare Rights which says we're all doing really well and we're managing all these fantastic outcomes. But according to your stats, they've got the lowest customer satisfaction in terms of the people who are ringing up our contact centre on that subject matter. So do you feedback, I'm not sure if this is people who are employed by Welfare Rights that are answering the phone, or it's people who are covering Welfare Rights questions and then sending people on to the department. How do you feed back, or how do you collect satisfaction on areas like that so that the service can learn? Because it might be that they're just dissatisfied because they didn't get anything, or is it that they're actually dissatisfied with how long the query is taking, that kind of thing? How do we find out about that?
Thank you. So in terms of welfare here, we're referring to the local welfare support scheme. And what we tend to find is that that's a service where there's a quite strict criteria as to whether you are eligible for any support or not. And a lot of the time, the customer is not eligible for support. So we have a mechanism to check as soon as a satisfaction survey comes in and it's been scored as dissatisfied across the board, we'll listen to it straight away to find out if there's something we need to do about it. But generally on these calls, you'll find that the customer service officer is giving the right information and advice. The customer's dissatisfied more with the outcome than actually what happened on the call. In terms of the second part of your question and engagement with services, every service that we provide to has a monthly liaison meeting with us. So we'll present their performance information to them. We'll talk about anything that seems to be driving demand in the contact centre. They'll feedback about any changes in processes that we need to be aware of, and we'll share that performance information to drive any improvements that we need to make.
So it sounds like the speed of the call, in terms of it being answered, isn't the primary driver of people's customer satisfaction. So is there any other way of measuring the more meaningful aspects of satisfaction from the call centre? So I think that would be quite useful to know that we didn't like the outcome that we got, the claim wasn't successful. That would be really useful for us to have a judgment of performance, because this is a performance indicator, isn't it? So you might have answered all of those calls within 2 seconds. for welfare, but they're dissatisfied because of the outcome. So improving your call times isn't going to help their dissatisfaction, is it? So I think it would be really useful to have that kind of feedback for the different areas. So refuse is in there as well. So you might answer that, you know, within 2 seconds as well, but they're bothered because their bins didn't get emptied, and even if they're told they'll come round tomorrow, they're still dissatisfied. So, and there's not a lot you can do about that, potentially, or there might be, but that's for the service to respond to, isn't it? So I think that would be useful instead of the speed of call.
Yeah, thank you. It's definitely a valid point around the speed of answer. So in the previous year, when we answered calls 4 minutes quicker, customer satisfaction was only 73%, and it was 71% this year. So despite it being 4 minutes quicker, we only gained 2% on satisfaction. We have just done some work to review the questions that we're asking, because we specifically want feedback about the call experience and whether we can try and focus the customer more on what's just happened on the call. And we are trialling that on some lines to see whether just changing the wording makes it more explicit about what we're asking for. There are other indicators that we ask about. So in relation, you know, I've reported here about knowledge and empathy, but we also ask them around, did you get what you wanted from the call today? And the customer also has the option to leave free text at the end. It's a text message, so they can respond back. And we do analysis on that, and that's where they will often express the dissatisfaction with not getting the outcome that they wanted.
Councillor Ray.
Thank you. Just, I appreciate answering the phone is really important. Is there any evidence that anybody's trying to rush the call to be able to answer other calls, and that there are repeated calls because of that? Do you see what I'm getting at? Sorry.
I think so, yeah. I don't think we see evidence of that. I think in one of the call charts you'll see we've included average handling time, and you'll see that varies wildly from service to service. So you might find that on a service like refuse, where someone wants to report a missed collection, a customer service officer will be able to get through that call quite quickly. But then you compare that to a call from children's services, where it might be somebody reporting a safeguarding concern, and those calls can be, you know, in excess of 40 minutes. And we encourage and train our customer service officers to deal with every call fully and appropriately, and our telephone system forecasts for that, so it knows that a children's social care call takes on average 40 minutes to deal with from start to sending off a referral, and it will give us that information to help us recruit sufficient numbers and make sure we've got that coverage. But we don't advocate for turning over quickly, and I think that's kind of proven in the stats that despite customers are waiting, our customer satisfaction is actually quite high in terms of age and empathy and knowledge. So we're certainly not getting the feeling that customers feel rushed, or that when they do connect to a customer service officer, they're not having a good experience when they speak to us.
Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you. Before I make my substantive point, just to comment on the bottom four in terms of customer satisfaction, I think you can imagine why the outcome satisfaction. I think that's a really important point you made about measuring that, because welfare, as David said, you get declined because you don't meet the criteria. Refuse, it's probably leave it out for 2 days. If not collected, take it back in. Then they come to councillors. Pest control, well, you're going to have to pay for that service. You're not going to be happy. And similarly with bulky waste, I presume that's bulky waste collections. Keep trying, keep trying. Anyway, my substantive point, and thank you for your report and presentation, is around the actual telephone system. Now, my GP surgery has got this really clever system where you're told you're 32 in the queue, but you can press number 1 and they'll call you back when you're first in the queue, which stops that listening to the whatever music's on and the long wait on the phone and so on. So I wondered if there were capacity to introduce that at Leeds for the council. Realise it might be a much bigger operation. Interestingly, when I was on Adults and Health Scrutiny Board, I did ask if that should be, well, it's recommended it should be rolled out to all GP services. So, but of course I'm not on that board anymore. They keep moving me around, you know, Councillor Galt. I'm not sure why. Anyway, that's the question. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ritchie. Yes, we already do have that functionality in the contact centre. It was introduced with the new telephony system that we put in April 24. There are thresholds that you have to meet, so it's either you've been waiting for 5 minutes or there are 10 calls in the queue, whichever comes first. And as soon as you hit that threshold, the automated messaging will then start offering you to hold the position in the queue. And it's just, you're just queued and the system will call you back when you're next in the queue. We don't offer it on our out-of-hours service just because those calls are emergency calls, so we tend to have really quick average speed of answer on there anyway. But you should find, well, hopefully you shouldn't find it because you'll be getting answered quicker than 5 minutes, but if you're waiting more than that, that will kick in.
I didn't know that calling a GP service would be used as an exemplar. Yeah? Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Chair, and can I thank you and the elected members for taking the interest in asking the question on the performance, and also I want to thank the officers for pulling the report together. It's been an excellent report as well. And as you know, and it's been really helpful and useful for myself as the new exec member for Housing Hub to take away some points and make sure we want to make some improvements, bringing back the reports for you, Chair, as well. And I just finally want to offer elected members, if they want to visit the contact centre, because they were quite interested, you want to know how it functions. The offers are up there for you, and what I can do is Alicia myself, we can work together to offer elected members if they want to come and visit the contact centre, see how they are performing and how the calls are handled. Thank you.
Yes, we did try and organise that last year, but we couldn't get a date that everyone could meet. But now we've got a little bit more time to plan it in, haven't we? Councillor Chahan, were you trying to get my attention?
I was indeed, if you don't mind, please.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was mentioned in terms of the spike for September for council tax inquiries from students and transient population. Is any sort of projects or anything planned to try and get them to self-serve or liaise with universities and landlords to try and obviously get them to obviously try and self-serve rather than call through?
Thank you. Yes, we do have some automation on council tax through a platform called GovTech, and it allows for the automation of simple council tax transactions. So that's things like changing your address, setting up a single person discount, or setting up a direct debit payment. It is automating some of the work for us, which is great, but it's quite sensitive in terms of data match, so it needs a little bit of refining because it will only automate when it's absolutely sure. So what I mean by that, for example, if my council tax was in the name of Alicia Barker and when I did the form I just put E Barker, it wouldn't push it all the way through the system, when that actually feels quite low risk, and maybe, you know, we could have a higher tolerance to some of those changes. I think the biggest challenge that we've got is that there's very few things that are simple about council tax, and we're finding that more and more people have just got queries on their bill and the payment and want to be absolutely sure about what they're paying before they make a payment. So we are doing some work looking at clarity on bills and trying to improve our automated payment options as well. But that's definitely ongoing and something we're doing in conjunction with our colleagues in strategy and resources. The project sits there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That draws to a conclusion our item on performance and our key performance indicators. Just for those people who are new, that is one of the more exhaustive agenda items that we do, because we want to make sure that everybody has a chance to say something, and of course the departments also have a chance to report on their correspondence. Going forward, a lot more of our items are more focused on specific service delivery. And of course this is also a great opportunity for us to have a think about areas we might want to have a closer look at going forward. And one of the more useful things is things like having a visit to the customer response centre, because it's not just about sitting in this room in terms of getting scrutiny. We also need to get out and about and experience things firsthand sometimes. And we're all up for those opportunities. And if you have any ideas going forward as board members, then please do let me know so that we can get it arranged. So in terms of this particular item, though, we do note that Dr. Temitope Adamasu is our new director and has a way of working which she wants to develop at pace, and that you did outline that there were some principles that you'd like to work towards and in step with us, and I think it's worthwhile for us to endorse those principles as members of the board. So thank you, and we look forward to working with you. So we just wanted to mention that at this stage. And now we can move on. Thank you for those that have been here today and withstood scrutiny and some difficult questions. And we thank you for your responses and the promise of the provision of more information at a later date. Remember, the KPIs that we have here are the ones which are usually nationally stipulated, but it doesn't stop services providing us with more data as we request it through the year, which might end up being more permanently included in our performance reports going forward. Okay, so if anybody has any ideas, because sometimes we don't think of everything on the day, once again, please get in touch and we'll make sure that that gets reflected. So next we have, is it the work programme? Yes. So,
95.
Page 95, if we all have a look at it now as board members. Thank you for your attendance. You are allowed to go now. Thank you.
We're going to ask Temitope to just stay for you.
Oh, we're asking Temitope to stay for a little bit. So where are we? 95. Okay. So this shows the different meetings going forward in the year. You will notice that we're not meeting every month, but it gives us an idea about what's coming up, so we can have a think about if there's anything that's not covered that we might want to fill some space with, or just being aware of the space that is there in case we do come up with stuff as we're going through the reports in July, for instance. Right, so do you want to take us through, Becky? Because you might be able to describe it better than me.
So at the moment, your work programme summarises known items of business. That includes things like the budget consultation and performance monitoring. It also includes any items that have been referred to the Scrutiny Board, for example, by the Executive Board, and it's important for new members to realize this is a live document. It comes to every public meeting and it will be updated throughout the year. It also currently reflects member requests that have come in from former members of the board or via the chair. You'll notice that, as referred to, next month you have a session with the police and representatives from the Mayor's office. So that I would say is immovable at the moment and comes every year as part of your responsibilities around safer, stronger communities.
What does DMPC stand for the
Deputy Mayor's Police Commissioner?
Right.
Sounds top of my head. But if there are other ideas you want to build into that work programme, obviously you've got Temitope here in terms of that kind of officer sends check as to how that fits with the service provision. And this isn't set in stone if you do want to make changes.
Yeah. Okay, so next month is going to be pretty substantial because Deputy Mayor responsibility for police, which is usually very good value as Councillor Lowe in terms of providing feedback to our concerns. There is usually a tension when it comes to police operationality, that they are meant to do so independently, but once again they are meant to be responsive to communities, and the sub-regional oversight from the West Yorkshire perspective does mean that sometimes it's difficult to get information on a Leeds district basis sometimes. And I think this year is quite a good year to deliver that challenge as local members more effectively and create a better engagement model. We did try last year to, for instance, align the scrutiny functions in constituent authorities with the police and crime panel, so that a wider range of scrutiny of the police service could be achieved across the district, because at the moment the police and crime panel really just scrutinises the budget as opposed to anything else. But those discussions didn't bear fruit last year, but we can attempt it again this year, I would suggest. Okay, so anything else on July? Happy with that? August, we don't have a meeting.
This is a calling.
Unless it's a calling. Oh yeah, so just for members' notice, if there is a decision that's made by the executive board that members feel that it has not been done in the correct way, because there are certain ways of doing decisions, it can be called into scrutiny for it to be looked at again. And the scrutiny board will be the judge of whether or not we should send it back to exec board for them to have a second think. Those are ad hoc and will be arranged ad hoc, but they're usually quite rapid. So it's just to warn you that you'll be asked for your availability for a certain day. But of course, remember, if you're not, there is always the possibility of somebody substituting for you to attend that meeting out of your group. And also, of course, there is the possibility for the public to show an interest in an area that they would like to have scrutinised. However, that will always come through an elected member, because they are the only ones allowed to bring forward an item. And once again, it will be up to us as a scrutiny board to make a judgment as to whether or not we'd like to take that on board as an item for scrutiny. Because you'll soon find out that the work programme gets quite full, and if you are to do anything justice, sometimes it needs to be looked at 2 or 3 times, maybe in a subgroup, as well as in the actual meeting itself. So now I'm looking at September. Becky.
In September, there was a request by the Equalities team to look at disability inclusive Leeds, which is also being considered by the Executive Board, and for consideration to be given to how we translate some of the organised ambitions around tackling misogyny into delivery. So that's provisionally been scheduled for September. You have no meetings in October. There was a request last year to consider the implementation of Pride in Place, and the suggestion was that would be most appropriate towards the end of this calendar year. So again, provisionally scheduled for November. You've got the update on the implementation of the Street Charter, provisionally for December on the advice of colleagues, and you'll also be having a remote working group of some description around the budget proposals to be determined with heads of finance, and that will be consistent across all the scrutiny boards. January, you'll be looking at the initial budget proposals in a formally constituted public meeting, which is required by the Budget and Policy Framework, and you'll also have your second performance update at that point. And then you've still got space in February to bring forward some of those other items. I've noted the requests around job shops, domestic violence and antisocial behaviour, and I'll work with the Chair and Temitope to look at how we can bring some of that forward later in the municipal year.
Yes. So, sorry, it'll soon get filled up in terms of our work programme. Sorry, Councillor Harrington.
Sorry, Chair. It's just the September one, the item on disability inclusive Leeds. Is it possible to get some feedback from the organisations that we asked to be consulted when making major changes within the city? Remember when we did the walk round for the sight disabilities, and they were really, really keen to be consulted. I'm just wondering if there's any information about how often we've actually consulted them and if they've taken their views on board.
Just for new members, that refers to a sim-spec walk that we did as a scrutiny board in conjunction with IIIG when it existed, to look at the lived experience of blind people in particular, to how we design highways infrastructure. And we did so through using glasses which impaired our vision to see what it was like for others to navigate Leeds city centre. And we were doing similar exercises throughout the year for those people that are wanting to be involved. So just to point out, the point here about implementation of Pride in Place, that is specifically there because it's a government programme and there's money coming in and it's to do with left behind communities. One of the things that we were keen to ensure, and it was reflected in Temitope's principles earlier, is that we ensure that locality working isn't just associated with so-called priority wards, and that we also develop a universal offer for all of the city to develop at the pace that they wish to in an enabled fashion. So that might come under the same agenda so that we have themed meetings for different months. Councillor Ritchie.
Yeah, thank you. We spoke about this in the pre-meeting, and it's around the sort of scope of our work on locality. So an emerging issue is the fact that Cleaner Neighbourhoods team now seem to be restricting what they do in terms of land ownership. So they're passing things on to education department, adult social care, housing, saying it's not our land, it's for them to sort out. And it's actually not working very well at the moment. I know there's meant to be a service review, and I think CEL are taking on some of the roles, but it feels like we've moved to the system without the review being published, and it isn't working in my experience in our ward, and I'm sure that's the same in other wards. So how do we bring that into this board when it probably falls under in the actual service in the environmental board?
Thank you, Councillor, and you're absolutely right. We do have a full audit review of CNT because we've heard time and time again how the service isn't working in the different areas. I guess what the Chair was referring to was the overarching localities model, which is a more place-based way of working, that we're looking more at what the need is for each ward and then making sure that we're layering the right interventions based on what the need is. So one of the in the council plan, one of the key delivery arms of that is the localities model. So that's what we want to bring here, to give you the overarching understanding of what the localities model is, and then within that there's key pieces of work like Pride in Place, Priority Ward, the Community Blitz, which the leader just in January, I think he'd promised about $1 million that would go to this universal blitz. So there's lots of things that we're doing in the more proportional universalism space that we want to bring here. But absolutely, your point of CNT and the audit and work that's already happening, I'll take that on board. I could speak with you on that, and if it is something that is spreading, that's wider, I don't know how we'd bring it back to this board, but I'm sure there's a way that we'd be able to talk about it here under that localities umbrella as well.
I think there's an option for bringing in lead officers from different services to a subgroup, if not to the main meetings, to tell us how they see their locality accountability being delivered, and we can offer our opinions at that point, and then hopefully come up with a report at the end of it. Yeah, to complement the work that's happening centrally. Councillor Ritchie.
Yeah, just to come back, how it fits in, it's about place, as you say, and the impact on the place, whether that's the look of it or the access. We're going to be talking about the street charter, which I'm pleased about, having worked on that, setting that up. And that's why it's so important to people, because it is around access, safe access, and it brings in things like, as I say, clean air, but also forestry as well, and the timescales. on what can be significant risks, particularly for people with visual impairments. So it's great doing these sim walks, and I did initiate those, you know, with the Pocklington Trust, wasn't it? When I had the disability champion role. It's what's changing after those sim walks, so that we're not just sort of paying lip service. People want to see change. That's a message that was on the doorstep as well during the election campaigns.
I think on that aspect, we should be working in step this year, shouldn't we? Because it is something which has been outlined in those principles, and that we certainly have as a priority for us as a board to make the discussions that we have concrete in improvements on the ground. Okay? So I apologise, we've gone over. Usually we go for 2 hours in a scrutiny board meeting, and we've gone over to be 2 hours 15 minutes. So apologies, that's my chairmanship. But I hope that we've had a decent discussion and that we've set a good foundation for a year of scrutiny of communities and equalities. And I appreciate Tematope staying behind to discuss the work programme in a very, very busy day and a very, very busy portfolio. And thank you for everybody attending today. And for those who are watching, thanks. Bye-bye.